Cinema Classics is brought to you by the Gateway Film Center, 1550 North High Street, Columbus, Ohio. Further details and showtimes online at gatewayfilmcenter.org.
The award-winning Cinema Classics is produced by John DeSando and Johnny DiLoretto. Listen to the shows and read reviews online at WCBE.org. I'm Johnny DiLoretto.
I'm John DeSando.
This is Cinema Classics.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of Cinema Classics, at the Gateway Film Center, John, on Sunday, November 1st,
Thank you.
we are going to celebrate the 25th anniversary of one of the greatest films ever made, Goodfellas.
Not The Godfather?
Not The Godfather,
Oh.
no. I love how you always put that inflection in the word God. Like
It's my Catholic training.
Goodfellas. Martin Scorsese's 1990 masterpiece.
Yeah.
And it will screen at 2 and 7 p.m.
Okay.
on Sunday. And at 7 p.m. there's a special Goodfellas themed party beforehand. You'll want to check out the website for details. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But
Okay.
do you remember the first time you saw Goodfellas?
No.
Almost did a spit take.
I do not have your
You don't
capacious
remember?
memory. No, I do not have your memory. The 7 years I continue to tell you, one of the reasons you stay on this show is that you have such a terrific memory.
Oh, is that what it is?
Oh, that's it.
Okay. I thought it was my rapacious wit. And
No, but anyway, no, I don't. But I was aware of Scorsese
yeah.
at that time.
Right.
By then, the 70s and 80s he owned as a director.
Well, I would
to
say he, in the 70s, in the early 70s, he was considered, this up-and-coming genius. And he had made a couple of movies that got a lot of attention. Mean Streets put him on the map.
Right.
Alice Doesn't Live Here got Ellen Burstyn an Academy Award. And suddenly he was a named director. And then he made Taxi Driver. That obviously was a controversial success and made Robert De Niro a huge star. Then De Niro and Scorsese collaborated on a big budget flop musical called New York, New York. Remember that?
Yeah.
With Liza Minnelli?
Yeah.
And suddenly Scorsese was floundering a bit. Also, by the way, just incidentally, did you know that De Niro is responsible for writing the song New York, New York?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that the two songwriters they hired to pen that theme song were struggling with it. They couldn't knock it out. And one night in a hotel, De Niro sat down with them, and he's the one that came up with all of it, the lyrics and the music. But they got credit for it.
Now, as an aside,
Now, wait
I
a
would
second.
like to ask you a question.
Yeah, what's that?
The one where he played Rupert
King of Comedy.
is that also
Rupert Pupkin.
right?
That is also Scorsese.
Which I thought was terrific.
Yes, well, that comes after, if we're going to do this properly.
Right,
we gotta
okay.
Put this in its
Yes.
proper context. That comes after Raging Bull.
Okay.
So they do this big flop in 1978, New York, New York. And then De Niro brings Scorsese Raging Bull, a project they both worked very hard on. It was a critical success, but a commercial failure
Okay.
as well. And, so too was King of Comedy. So in the 80s, really, Scorsese finds himself working in a really smaller vein. Creative successes, no commercial successes at all during the 80s. Mostly he's working in a minor key and getting some critical attention. Again, he was still recognized, but I think in some ways he felt himself floundering creatively. He couldn't get enough funding for some of the films that he wanted to make, like Last Temptation of Christ. I think you could say The Color of Money was probably his biggest success in the 80s.
Okay.
That's the sequel to The Hustler with Paul
Okay,
Newman and Tom
yeah.
Cruise. Paul Newman obviously got the Academy Award for that, long
Yeah.
overdue. So that gave him a little momentum heading into the 90s, but the 80s were like a mixed bag for him.
Okay.
When this movie came out in 1990, it's sort of, there's one of these famous shots in Goodfellas where Ray Liotta as the gangster Henry Hill snorts a line of cocaine, a really powerful cocaine, and he braces himself up and the camera's thrust into his face, and you kind of feel that electrical charge of that drug shooting through your body and how intense that was. That's a perfect analogy for what this movie did to moviegoers. It was a jolting, bracing shock to the system.
Are you kidding? If you ever read Roger Ebert's review of this, and he is just almost speechless at the perfection of this film. And
Yeah.
I mean, he was a longtime friend of Martin Scorsese, so you
Yeah.
have to take that a little bit with a grain of salt. But basically, I've really rarely read anything that Ebert has written that
Right.
is as laudatory as that for this film.
Yeah, I do remember seeing it for the first time as a young college student, and I think I can say without being too hyperbolic that it changed my life.
Okay.
It changed the way I saw movies. It changed the way I wanted to think about film, or the way I looked at films. Then I went back and devoured all of Scorsese's films, and I was aware of him too, but I hadn't quite dug my heels into his oeuvre as I did after seeing this movie. Interestingly enough, what happened with Goodfellas was that his entire filmography had been reconsidered and reevaluated. So all those movies that I said during the 80s were considered maybe half critical successes were suddenly reevaluated, and everything the guy made was pretty much relooked at as being a work of art.
What don't you think?
New York included.
A little bit like Orson Welles, where
Sure.
it takes that something somewhere to click and then to look back.
That's a great thing. Unfortunately for Orson Welles, what happened with Scorsese was that he was suddenly accepted into the Hollywood fold in a way he hadn't been before.
The
And
analogy
then
of Wells
he could
doesn't
make
work.
right. Wells was never accepted. But after the attention and box office success that this movie met with, Scorsese was given a lot of creative freedom in Hollywood. He was able to make pretty much whatever he wanted and get the budgets that he needed to make the movies that he wanted. Now, that led to a period, I think, the late Scorsese period. I think he had too many resources, and some of those movies, I feel, lack Scorsese's, scrappy sort of dogged determinedness to make a work of art.
Well, I think one of the things that our audience is going to know when it comes to see this is a director who cares about character.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, to me, the real difference about this is that it's a mob story. Goodfellas is a mob story.
Yeah.
But it's a mob story with people, definable people you remember. And so the blood and guts, while there's some in that film, never takes precedence over the fact that you've got somebody like Henry Hill changing in the course of time. But even in the beginning, what a romantic opening for a kid looking out his window, seeing the wise guys, and what a great life.
Yeah, you can certainly. That's the beauty part of the movie, is that this allure that genre even holds for moviegoers. Because the movies like The Godfather were so enamored of those characters and that lifestyle, and that's what we see at the beginning of the movie. That doesn't last.
No, I know, as it should.
Yeah, right. It gets brutal. It gets ugly. Allegiances are dicey at best.
Yes.
And you realize that you're in this world where, like, at any moment, you could either be slaughtered in the backseat of a car or arrested by the FBI. I think it's important to point out exactly how influential this movie was, not only in terms of the gangster genre, which it changed forever. Every gangster movie
For sure.
ever since.
It made Ray Liotta's career in second-rate movies.
Measured up to this movie, but also in terms of style, I still see this movie aped. Whole sequences of this movie. Most recently, David O. Russell's American Hustle uses the blueprint for Goodfellas in terms of editing, pacing, character. Right out of Goodfellas, right down to shots of telephones he's stealing from Scorsese.
So, in the sense that Goodfellas is different from The Godfather, explain a little bit of that difference, because I know people sometimes like to talk about the two of them as these greatest mob movies, but aren't they quite different?
Well, yeah, they're very different. I think you could say that Coppola, when he was making The Godfather, was working in a very classical vein.
Yeah.
It's classical cinema. The structure of it, the compositions of it, the movement of it is very austere, and the compositions are framed perfectly, and the pacing is literary. He's adapting a work of, one might say, literature, obviously, and so the movie has this storytelling kind of element to it.
And gravity.
And gravity, right? And Coppola also not quite as energetic or nervous or anxiety-riddled a filmmaker as Scorsese. You know, when you hear those two guys talk, you can see the styles of their film reflected in the patterns of their speech. This movie is, you know, a formalist movie. There's movement in the camera. There's things that are happening. He is using the camera to elucidate really visceral kind of reactions.
And the lighting, for instance, is just a beautiful work of art.
Mm-hmm.
But you get some of that in Goodfellas too. But what I like about Goodfellas is the energy I think you're talking about.
Yeah.
And what I like the realism
Yeah.
of Goodfellas.
Mm-hmm.
So
the realism despite the sort of heightened techniques that Scorsese uses.
Yeah.
That's why he's a genius, is because he can use those flashy techniques, but it doesn't kind of take you out of the experience of the characters. It actually puts you right in their shoes.
And don't forget, besides De Niro and Ray Liotta,
Mm-hmm.
you have Joe Pesci.
Right.
I think he got the Oscar, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, it's such an
defining
iconic role. You know, the little guy, who is a total psychotic, who you never know what button you're going to push with him. He's scary. It's a frightening character. That's the other thing. I mean, we laugh at that character now.
Yeah.
But at the time we saw it, we've seen so many variations of it since.
At that time?
But at that time, it was frightening.
I was going to say scary.
It was scary.
And you have people like Paul Sorvino,
Mm-hmm.
who seems to be a classic mobster type.
Yeah.
I mean, his role is perfectly cast.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, a whole bunch of Lorraine
Bracco,
yeah,
who went on to, you know, this movie sort of leads
it
invariably to, well, both analyze this, which was De Niro's comic, you know, his comic turn as a gangster with Billy Crystal, which the premise of it was he was visiting a psychiatrist, and then that led to The Sopranos.
Yeah.
Which the original premise of it was the confessions of a gangster to his psychiatrist, played by Lorraine Bracco.
Right. Well, you know, what's sad about our show today is that we've had nothing bad to say about Goodfellas.
Right.
So I guess we're going to have to say if we were grading it, we probably have a flat A. We don't give A+.
Have to go off the charts.
I know
the
we
grades.
don't.
And let's remind everybody again, it's November 1st, 2 and 7 p.m. at Gateway Film Center. We are going to screen it in 35 millimeter, as it was seen in 1990 when it shocked the world and changed the face of cinema.
So come on Sunday and be shocked.
Mm-hmm.